Hi guys, it's Marissa Schultz here, author of The Rise High Investor. Thanks for tuning in to one of my weekly videos where I share with you tips to help you with your property investment journey. Today we're talking about a really important topic, which is succession planning. It's often one that we leave to, put on the bottom of the to-do list, especially if you're young in your investment journey, but it is a really important one. And let's face it, a lot of us, one of the main reasons why we're wanting to build that property investment portfolio is to leave a legacy for our loved ones, which is a fantastic reason for wanting to build that wealth through property. But succession planning does require really careful planning and careful consideration. So the first step is to really sit down with yourself or with your partner and really think about how you want your assets distributed, who you want your assets to go to, and how you want them to benefit from these assets. And then it's really important that you get really good advice from a lawyer and get a detailed will for the assets that you hold in your personal names. One of the things that you really need to consider when you're doing this and getting the right advice from the lawyer is you need to consider the land tax, income tax, and asset protection issues that may arise for your loved ones if you pass down assets to them in a certain way. So for example, if you just do a simple will and you pass down all your assets to your spouse, that may actually result in them having to pay a lot of land tax and might result in income tax issues, and it may expose them from an asset protection perspective, which may mean that you put them into more financial stress, and that's not the objective of what you're trying to do. So it's really important that you get the right advice as to how best to distribute the assets to the people that you want them to go to without them having any issues down the track. So you need to think really long term. One of the ways that you can look at that and talk to the lawyer about that is looking at, instead of passing assets down to an individual in their individual capacity, maybe you could look at testamentary trusts and how they might work to help you to pass down assets to an individual but via a trust. And that might help to alleviate some of those issues. That's something that your lawyer has to give you advice on. Make sure you ask the question. You also really need to understand at the time that you're doing your succession planning, the assets that you hold jointly with a partner or with a spouse or with someone else, do you hold them as tenants in common or do you hold them as joint tenants? Because this can impact what happens to the assets long term and what you need to do with the assets long term. For example, joint tenants won't really give you an option of what you do with your share of the asset upon your death. So you need to take that into consideration when you're doing your succession planning. Whereas tenants in common will give you the ability to decide how you want your share of the asset dealt with upon your death. So therefore, there are different considerations to think about. You also need to think about what will happen if your spouse remarries after your death. So if you give everything to your spouse and they remarry, how do you want things to pan out from that perspective? And the other thing to understand is that marriage makes wills invalid. So you always need to make sure that your will is up to date. So if you do have a will before you get married, once you get married, your will becomes invalid. So you need to create another will. And I also suggest that if you are in a process of, building your property portfolio, that it's a great idea to get a will updated regularly so that it does actually reflect your current position. If you've got trusts and companies that are holding property, you need to consider who the appointers are of the trusts, to ensure that they are the people that you want to be making the decisions upon your passing so that they can appoint a new trustee to control that trust. And for companies, you want to see who are the directors so that they can actually have survivorship and they can actually continue running with those assets beyond your life. I believe that it's never ever too early to start succession planning, and it is an absolute must if you've got significant property assets and if you want to protect the assets that you've worked so hard to build. So I think it's really important, make an appointment with your lawyer, get your will done, make sure you've got your succession planning in place and keep it regularly updated as you build your property portfolio. That's all I've got time for today. Thanks for tuning in. If you've got any questions, thoughts or comments, you can email me at propertyinvestor@risehigh.com.au. That hits my personal inbox and I would love to get your question or comment. And as a thank you for tuning in, you can actually get a 50% discount off the purchase of one of my books. The website is Rise High Investor and all you need to do is enter the code video at the checkout counter. So thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Bye.